Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Premier Chelsea, your source for all things Premier League, but starting with Chelsea first. Coming into you on your speakers and headsets. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jacky from Houston, and I have Rahul here from Connecticut. Rahul's back to the old days, my friend, just you and I again.
It is, and our good friend Haaland.Hive, Lukaku.Hive is out today, but yeah, we're back to the original squad.
Yeah, we've got a few things to talk about. Alex will be missed because I know he has some strong opinions on our strikers that we're definitely being linked with today, but we'll catch up next week with him and see what happens from there. But we want to jump right into transfers maybe because it's getting kind of crazy a little bit out there.
Yeah, final month of the transfer window, and things are kicking off. Last time we spoke about Chelsea making their first signing in Marcus Bettinelli, and now things have kind of picked up in terms of the striking position, where for the longest time it was about Haaland and what are Chelsea going to do? Is there an official bid? Team Holland don't want to do anything with Dortmund until Chelsea make the bid. Now there's a whole new name on the horizon, and new in the sense that we've spoken about him in the past, and
Right.
we actually owned him 9 years ago, and I'm talking about Romelu Lukaku.
Wow. This is not a blast from the past, right? No, just kidding. Look, Lukaku is one of those names that you and I personally had always hoped that he would kind of take the mantle on from Didier Drogba. And I hate to say that because I think he's a slightly different style of player to Drogba. He just had that big physical presence. And I was really disappointed when we sold him on to Everton. And a few years later, when he was moving from Everton to Manchester United, we were kind of in the mix again, linked with him. And my opinion at the time was we let him go the first time. We're going to go spend 70 odd million to bring him back. And now I'm hearing we're going to go try for 100 odd million to bring him back. Isn't that kind of crazy?
It is, and I mean, there's two aspects to this, right? There's the market, and when you need a top striker, and Lukaku is a top striker, let's
Mm-hmm.
be honest, in world football, he's got to be up there. You've got to pay the big bucks, and especially
Right.
when Inter don't want to sell. And on the other side, I think it's very well known in the transfer market in the football world that Chelsea are looking for a striker. So those two things coming together, Inter are trying to make the most out of it, and you know, not saying that they need this money, but you can't turn down 130 million euros.
Well, speaking of strikers and 130 million, it sounds like Dortmund is turning down that much money for Haaland, who I'm hearing for next season could go as little as 75 based on some release clauses and things like that. So that's really another interesting one, just based on again, Lukaku is still young enough to make a good impact for the next 4 seasons, but then you go to Haaland, who could make a good impact for the next 10 seasons. And you're wondering where 120, 130, maybe go for the 150, 160, go for Haaland. Again, I don't think I have a preference. We've always been Team Haaland for the longest time just because he's new, he's exciting, he's different. But Lukaku would be definitely a marquee signing. A couple of questions I have for you is when Lampard had his season last year, he started the season with Tammy and Giroud and then slowly kind of faded out to Giroud and Timo. A normal number nine, Tammy kind of almost took a back seat. Tuchel comes in and Giroud, who's another number nine, took an even further back seat. We started going with a false nine, almost with no recognized out and out striker. And we did pretty well. I mean, we were not scoring big goals per games. It was one goal here, but he kind of swapped between Pulisic, Timo Werner and Kai Havertz playing that front position. Do we need to go out and buy a big false number? I mean, a big number nine, maybe?
I think we do, and it like you said, he made it work from January to May, ended up with a Champions League, and you can say, well, we've got a Champions League winning attacking line, so why do we need to add a 130 million pound or euro player? But I think back to games like when we played Southampton away. I think back to when we played Leeds away. Even when we played some of the home games where we struggled, I'm thinking of West Brom, and I say
Mm-hmm.
struggled because we ended up losing due to a red card, but we still created a lot of chances in this 4 or 5 months that Tuchel has been here. But we didn't finish them, and I think that's
Agreed.
where we're saying we need someone who's going to finish these chances. And for how good Timo has been in terms of working hard, for giving his all, Havertz coming back from COVID and doing a good job and doing a job that he can do when required, but that's not what he's in the team for.
Right.
I think having Lukaku there almost says we're going to create 10 chances and we're going to put away 8, 9 maybe, and that's what we need.
Right. You know what's interesting, Rahul, is speaking of Timo, speaking of Kai, speaking of Christian Pulisic trying to play that role, it's almost like we've talked about this for the whole year now. We miss some physical steel or physical presence. And when I alluded to physicality, I was always talking about the midfield where we needed more strength, because Kante is kind of the only one who would physically boss people around. Jorginho and Kovacic have a different type of style to them. We want some physicality. And you look around the field, and yes, Giroud could hold up play and Tammy could to a certain degree, but they weren't getting chances. And the three that have played in that front row, they weren't the most physical. Don't get me wrong. I think on their day when Kai, Timo, Mason Mount even want to actually push a play off, they can. But just having that presence up there saying, look at me, occupy the space, pay attention to me, it might benefit these names I've mentioned because they may get to run in behind. And I hope that if we do sign someone like Lukaku, maybe the expectations aren't 20 goals, which we'd love to see 20 goals from him for the season, but maybe the return of a Timo, maybe the return of a Kai and Mount will go up because they're playing off a player like similar to what Lampard used to do off of Drogba, Malouda, Joe Cole. They all kind of played off of him, and he got his 20 goals too. So that will come with time, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely will. And I'd like to say, I know Lukaku had a tough time at Manchester United, but before that, he did very well for West Brom. Like we said, I think before we started recording, he got 17 goals in his first season for West Brom. Then he moved to Everton, did very well for them. In fact, his best season in the Premier League came for Everton in 16-17 when he got about 25 goals. So he's got that Premier League experience. Yes, Manchester United didn't work out for him as he would have expected, but he's gone away. He's gone to Inter, and I think he's almost taken his game to another level where he scored, I think, about 72 goals for Inter Milan.
Yeah, so I'm looking at his stats here, Rahul. I just had a second to pull it up. For Manchester United, actually, it feels like they were held to a different standard back then. He played 51 appearances for the 17-18 season and made 27 goals. And then the following season, which was his bad season, was 45 appearances and 15 goals. Now, I don't have the assists that he contributed to and how many games he started versus how many came off the bench. But when he went to Inter, it was a similar story. He played 51 and 34 goals in his first season. This past season was 44 appearances and 30 goals. So there are goals in there, regardless of what you want to say about his time at Manchester United. I don't think it was a bad time by any means necessarily. And remember, he had to play against like Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Jose Mourinho sometimes used to pull him out of the team, put a different type of player in there. So maybe inconsistency had something to do with that as well. But I've always been an admirer of him. Like I said earlier on, I think his heart was with Chelsea when he first signed. I still remember some of his very, very early interviews about the love and the passion he had. His idol was Didier Drogba. He didn't want to be Didier Drogba, but he looked up so much to Didier Drogba. And it's one of those things where, again, the money they talk about these days is crazy. And maybe I have to get over that just because I know what we paid for him 9 years ago. But maybe it'll be a good return. We've talked about the return of Eden Hazard. And I think between you, me, and Alex, we said that's coming from the heart, but the mind saying, let Eden go. But the Lukaku one's a very interesting one. And I think I would be happy if he were to join us.
Yeah, I think so too. And adding a goal scorer, like you said, all the goals that you mentioned, even if he scores a portion of those, that's almost, picking up 6 to 9 points, maybe even 12 points that we didn't have last season.
Right.
So I think the only thing, like you said, is the final cost of this whole transfer. But in today's market, when other teams, and I know we'll touch on City, spend in a few seconds, I think this kind of money is almost normal now.
Yep. And then just before we move off the Lukaku saga, there's also talk of, as part of the money, potentially Marcos Alonso might be going in the other direction if Inter are interested, if Alonso is interested. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah.
It's getting close to crunch time, and I'd like to see this deal put to bed before the season starts. He needs a little bit of time to settle in.
He does. And I saw a lot of, because the last time he played for us in the Super Cup, he missed a penalty and we lost. So everyone's saying it's time for redemption, and he's coming back to win us the Super Cup. So, hey, if it happens before the 11th, which is next week, I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, definitely so. So if we're going full gung-ho for Lukaku, what does this mean for Haaland?
That dream's over for this season now. Maybe next season we go back and we say, here's 75 million and we want Haaland. But I think a lot of other teams are going to be in for him next season, and it's going to be a tougher fight with other clubs, not directly with Dortmund like it was this season, but we got to take it one season at a time, and it's Lukaku coming for now.
So, Alex, I think you've changed your Instagram handle from Haaland.Hive to Lukaku.Hive. Hopefully that one comes through so you don't have to change the name again. But looking at number 9s, Rahul, we've got Lukaku potentially coming in. Haaland was on the market for a while, at least in Chelsea's eyes. We have another number 9 that potentially doesn't have a spot in Chelsea anymore in Tammy Abraham. Any news on what's happening there?
Yeah, the latest coming out, again, Fabrizio Romano, the main man, is saying that Tammy Abraham is being linked to a move to Atlanta in Italy, and that's because it's kind of like a striker roulette. So Lukaku moves to Chelsea. Inter are going to go for Atlanta striker right now, Duvan Zapata, the Colombian.
Yep.
And if he moves to Inter, then Atlanta are going to come to Chelsea for Tammy Abraham. So it's kind of like a domino effect. If Chelsea make that move final with Lukaku, then Tammy Abraham's almost certain to be leaving.
Okay, that's going to be an interesting one. I know Tammy has had both his core group of followers and his core group of anti-supporters, dare I say. So it's going to be interesting. I think you said before we started recording, he only has a year, maybe a year and a half left on his contract.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is crunch time. Either he signs or we're going to have to make a deal to move him on. And whether he moves or he stays with us, we wish him all the best.
Yeah, and I think today was his final home game if he ends up leaving. And I think I heard somewhere, I actually saw the picture, he was crying. So that almost tells you what's going on behind the scenes. And he's a Chelsea boy, and hopefully we can see him back in the future.
Yeah, like Lukaku, it might
Exactly.
come full circle again. All right, talking about some players we're trying to bring in, seems like we're looking at center backs again, and we talked about this one last time. Any updates here?
So I think it's kind of staying with Jules Kounde. Chelsea is still negotiating, a little bit different in terms of what Sevilla want versus what Chelsea want to pay. But the one thing that I haven't seen being reported since last week is Kurt Zouma being involved in this deal.
Right.
So maybe those rumors in terms of him going in the Conde deal have dropped, but I still think he's being heavily linked to West Ham.
Oh, okay.
So
there's
there's
interesting developments there.
Yeah, still some movement around Zouma, which personally he's done pretty well this in preseason. So it would be good to keep him, but we can't keep them all.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one. I think we've already talked about it. We've got Thiago Silva, Rudiger, Andreas Christensen, Malang Sarr, Zouma. So that's 5. We play 3. Reece James can play there. Not to mention, I think you were talking about Matt Miazga still on the books.
He is, but the one player that has impressed, and I watched him in that Spurs game today, is Trevor Chalobah.
Okay, there you go.
A youngster, Chelsea youngster, and he's looked very good. And I hope he stays and doesn't go out on loan, because I think he could have a role to play at least. Like I think I mentioned on one of our Instagram posts, we have 6 competitions this year.
Right.
And so we're going to need players, and we're going to need, people to fill in when these games start coming. So Chalobah could be a great option.
Yeah, and I guess my only point is we're looking at already in-house 8 potential center backs. We need 3 to play. Maybe we keep 6. I get that, but we're still going to go out and try and sign another one. It's definitely crazy season right now, and I think Chelsea are not necessarily on shock value, but we did miss that one transfer window where we were on a ban, and we went full forward trying to find attacking players to kind of fill the void. Now it seems we've come back to balance. We're looking at real positions where we want to fill in, from center backs to midfielders to attackers. So it's going to be an exciting transfer window. It's just, again, like I repeat, nerve-wracking to get to the final few weeks here and try and fit all of these players coming in. And I will talk about outs in a few minutes, but do you want to talk about some City news and see what's going on there?
Yeah, so I mean, Pep Guardiola back in, I think, April said they didn't have the money to buy a striker, and here they are about to drop £100 million on Jack Grealish. And then Harry Kane, I'm sure everyone's seen the news, has not turned up for training all week. I think he's in Florida from what I saw, and he's staying there until his move to Man City is finalized, and that's rumored to be around 160 million. So
interesting.
All of a sudden, City have found over 250 million pounds on 2 players.
Yeah, that's going to be huge. You know, what's interesting about this is I read and I've heard quite a few things about, oh, Harry Kane is being inappropriate or not being a gentleman and holding up his contract or whatnot. But there's a lot of things going around about the fact that he had a gentleman's agreement with the owner of the club, not Mike Levy, what's his name? Daniel Levy,
Yeah.
saying that if we don't make Champions League, I would like to move on to try and get some big trophies into my career before my career is over. They're not holding up that part of the agreement either. And the flip side of some of these arguments is Harry Kane should go to training because he's not being disrespected by Tottenham. He's being disrespected by Manchester City. If Jack Grealish is worth 100 million, why are they offering 100 million initially for Harry Kane? But I'm sure they were just testing the waters, and things will even itself out in the next few weeks here.
They will, but you think about that City squad already, and now they're adding two quality world-class players into that mix, and it's almost taking it to a next level, but also adding a whole different complexity because Jack Grealish at Aston Villa is the main man.
Right.
He now comes to City, and there's a lot of main men there, and he may not get the ball as much as he does. And how does he handle it? So
right. And
a big headache for Pep.
Yeah, and we've seen that, Rahul, Chelsea, especially in the earlier years where we would buy a Sean Wright-Phillips, who was a big name coming in from, ironically, Manchester City to Chelsea, and he just couldn't fit in or kind of work his way into the team. And there were other players that I don't have off the top of my head, but coming for big money from different clubs, Andrei Shevchenko, for example, would come in and they just could not fit into, which has a team full of superstars, for lack of a better word. So it's going to be definitely interesting. It's a good time for him to move. I believe I read he was 25 or 26, so he's kind of at that sweet spot, and it might work out for him too. So
yeah, and I mean, just seeing what City is doing, I saw a report saying Chelsea want to respond to that. So our response is that Lukaku deal, and I don't think, like, I think, was it a few weeks ago, Chelsea, there was a rumor that Chelsea don't want to be left behind.
right.
I think it was about the Super League, if I remember right, and that's why they joined it. And I think the moves we're making is with that same mindset: is we don't want to be left behind Man City, who continue to just strengthen their squad.
Yeah, it's been a few years since we've lifted the Premier League, and so I think it's probably time for us to make a serious challenge. And I think last year when we were talking about this, we had said if we challenge for top four, that will be good, and maybe get a little bit closer. We were a bit closer this season, but I think now with the forward power that we had from last season, settling in a full preseason, a manager coming off a Champions League, we really should be at the final stages of the Premier League when we get towards the end of the season.
Absolutely.
So 100 million coming in from City to Villa, and looks like Villa is spending it pretty well so far.
They are. They're building a decent squad, and not just replacing Jack Grealish, but kind of strengthening in different positions. So they actually signed Buendia from Norwich City earlier in the transfer window. Out of nowhere, they added Danny Ings today, which in the world of rumors and stories flying around, that one was completely out of nowhere. And kudos to them because they kept it under the rugs and pulled it off.
Yeah, Danny Ings is a very, very good move. He's the type of striker that, unfortunately, he's got a lot of injuries over his career, but he's the type of striker when he's fit, he really can cause some damage. Because I'm looking here at his stats for Burnley in the Championship. He scored 26 goals in 45 appearances. When he came to the Premier League, first season in the Premier League, he made 11 goals in 37 appearances, which is not too bad for a striker first season in the Premier League. He got a big money move to Liverpool, and that's where his injuries kind of started, and it never really worked out. And when he went out to Southampton, he kind of rediscovered that form. 25 goals in 42 appearances, and last season 13 and 33 before another injury took its toll. So he's got some skills there, and Aston Villa never really had a focal point last season. I know they had Wesley in their squad for a little bit, but he was in and out with injury as well. So this is looking good. And Leon Bailey has been on the radar of many a top club for the last few years. So they've got a good deal here in what they're bringing into their squad. So I'm excited to see how they perform over the next few seasons.
Yeah, Villa, I think they spent money their first season in the Premier League, which was Lampard's first season, so almost 2 seasons ago. And it took some time for them to gel. They stayed in the league, and last season you saw they were one of the high flyers, at least at the start of the season. And now they're making moves to kind of strengthen and stay in the league, which good for them. I mean, they've got a good squad, and they add to it. They're adding to it wisely. They're not just adding because they're getting 100 million. They're adding in positions that are going to be good for them.
For sure. I think that's definitely going to help them, and maybe they're one to watch for this upcoming season.
Yeah, top four.
All right. Do you want to talk about an exit that happened from Chelsea?
Yeah, so this kind of feels like repeating myself because for the last few episodes we've spoken about young players leaving Chelsea, and another one has left. Tino Livramento, who was actually Academy Player of the Season last year, has moved to Southampton.
Hmm.
Um, and the only positive from this is we've put in a sell-on clause, which if we don't decide to buy him because we also put the buyback clause, we would get some money out of the deal. So
Right.
in a way, it's good for him to go away and get some playing time, and for Chelsea to cover themselves in case they want to bring him back. But it's kind of turned into a theme of this transfer window where young players, academy players, have left Chelsea.
Yeah, and I think under Frank Lampard there was always hope, just because what he had done with, unfortunately now, Tammy Abraham, who may leave, and Reece James and Mason Mount, and then Billy Gilmore, and there were a few others that he had given opportunities to. There was always this feeling of, if he was stuck, he was going to turn to the youth, because he was a young prospect at West Ham. He brought these 3 or 4 together, and they were pretty successful as Chelsea starting 11 material. With now Tuchel coming in, us winning the Champions League, it's almost back to the Chelsea of old. Trust me, I'm not complaining when we win trophies and we're performing really well, but it is bittersweet that you may tend to neglect the youth team that we've done so well for in the last 2 to 3 seasons here.
Yeah, I mean, that's Chelsea though. Like, you got to have the best players. You've got to win everything that's out there to be won. And like you said earlier, we haven't won the Premier League in a while. So I think everything this season is to push for that title and be champions for the first time since 2017.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to make some interesting viewing for the next few seasons. I'll be watching closely just to see what happens with the youth, because Chelsea do have a very strong academy. It's just a matter of, will anybody really make it through in the next
Step
few
up,
seasons?
yeah.
So if you want to move on to the Mind series, Rahul, I think that will be great. And then we can talk about some of the players that are in the youth academy and some of the players who are still here after several years, and how we're trying to shoehorn them in.
Yeah, so the Mind series kicked off on Sunday. We played Arsenal at the Emirates. And the starting team was Mendy, Chalobah, like I had mentioned earlier, Zuma, Rudiger, Hudson-Odoi, Loftus-Cheek, Kovacic, Pulisic, Ziyech, Havertz, and Werner, which was good for Havertz and Werner because they had just come back from the Euros in terms of they had an extended break, as well as Rudiger, but they got some minutes. And the other interesting thing was Pulisic and Hudson-Odoi were used as wingbacks, which we've seen Hudson-Odoi, but Pulisic a little more defined in that role in this preseason. And I think it's just an opportunity for Tuchel to try different things. And Pulisic looked pretty good.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we have a lot of attacking players. So trying to keep everybody happy, you may need to ask them to play a wing-back role.
Yeah.
So they could get on a minute, they could get an opportunity to prove themselves in a different position. And Tuchel has then a different game plan, not necessarily formation-wise, but maybe a Reece James playing right wing-back is different to a Hudson-Odoi playing right wing-back, where you get a little more direct crossing and threats going forward. So I'm excited to see it. I don't know what he's going to do with it as the season progresses, but why don't we touch on a couple of names here? You already talked about Chalobah a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Any thoughts you want to share on him?
Yeah, he's looked good. He's played, I believe, on that right-hand side, kind of where Azpilicueta plays, and he's been looking good. He's looking strong and looking determined to kind of keep that position, or at least be an option in Tuchel's mind. So that's good to see from him, and hopefully he doesn't go out on loan as I'll give him all these compliments. But it's good that another academy player is kind of stepping up and trying to make a mark for himself in the first team.
Yeah, for sure. And then touching on our Germans that came back and played in that first half, Kai-Havertz scored a pretty decent goal there.
He did, and Timo Werner set him up. So
he did.
That combination seems to be working pretty well. And Havertz, like you said, was a brilliant finish. And I think this season we may get to see the real, or close to the real, Kai Havertz that we paid 80 million for last year.
And the same for Timo. I think Alex and I have been saying that all season, that it could be his chance. And before we drop off the subject of Timo, you sent me a very interesting article that talks about how VAR may be changing their offside rules. So maybe you want to run us through that for just a quick second, because I think it might benefit Timo Werner quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the new ruling is giving attackers or the attacking side the benefit of the doubt. So they won't be using toenails and like noses to determine if a player is offside. I think they would just give the benefit to that player and the goal
Right.
would count. And so I think the Premier League executive had said something like you'd be getting back at least 20 goals that were called off last season, which kind of exciting because goals make games exciting. And for a player like Timo Werner, who was countless times
Yeah.
offside, and we complained on this podcast about VAR and about Timo Werner when he was rightly called offside. This should be exciting to see.
Yeah, I was going to make a quick joke of the 20 goals that we'll get back. Probably 15 belong to Timo Werner with how many times he was called offside. Most of them were correct, though. I have to be honest there. But maybe he's the type of player that plays off the shoulder. So if he can get his timing right, the first full season in England, you might see a few more goals coming in from Timo Werner here.
Yeah, I agree. And one more player to touch in the starting 11 for the Arsenal games, Loftus-Cheek.
Oh yeah,
We did talk about him, I believe, in our last episode, but Tuchel did come out and say, well, now I have one spot open in midfield. Billy Gilmore did leave on loan. So uh, it's up for grabs. And I think that was a message to the likes of Loftus-Cheek, who, went out on loan last season, worked hard at Fulham, stayed injury free, which was key for him
it was
because
great. Yeah.
we watched him get injured in Boston. And I think he's ready and he's looked pretty good in preseason.
One spot open for a midfielder. Rahul, let's talk about the midfielders that could potentially go up for that spot other than Loftus-Cheek. I'm just reading some of the players that came on in that second half that could potentially fill in there. Danny Drinkwater, still with us. He could take that position. Ross Barkley, still with us. He could take that position. So you got three players that really know how to play that midfield. I'm sure there are a few others that can come in and out. Reece has played that position as well, of course, but of those three, I mean, Barkley was signed with a lot of potential in mind. Danny Drinkwater was a Premier League winner many, many seasons ago. He's kind of tapered off. And Ruben had an explosive season under Sarri, and unfortunately, that injury put him down. Who do you pick of those three?
I have one more name for you.
All right,
And
let's throw that in
we're
there.
jumping ahead a little bit in terms of the Tottenham game, but Bakayoko is also an option for that midfield position.
Right.
So, out of all of those, I think Loftus-Cheek makes the most sense. Younger, more athletic, gives a different options in terms of physicality, his
Right.
running up and down, like we saw you said under Sarri. And I think he's hungry to be successful at Chelsea. He had that good season and then it kind of stopped.
Right.
So I think out of all of those, unless we're going to go out and spend money, which would not be a surprise for Chelsea, I think Loftus-Cheek is a good option.
Yeah, and he's also a Chelsea boy through and through. We just finished talking about when's the next time we're going to see some good academy players come through. So I'm really hopeful there. But what do we do with so many additional midfielders? At some point, you're either going to have to send them out, and I think trying to find them clubs at this point is going to get difficult.
I think it is, but you also got to, I think similar to Harry Kane's situation, as we get closer, clubs will start looking at other options in terms of who else is out there. I'm not saying Harry Kane's not going to go to Man City, but I think his price may come down closer to what
Right.
City wants. So similar to that, Drinkwater, Barkley, Chelsea may be wanting to see who's going to give them the most money. But as we
Sure.
get closer, it may be let's just get them off the books and save those wages, which may not, again, no disrespect to them, but I just don't think they fit into the system with Tuchel.
Yep.
But Drinkwater has also looked good in preseason.
Yeah, he
so,
has. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough decision.
It definitely is. Let me throw out a few more names that did come on in that second half. By the way, the game finished 2-1. We didn't touch on that. Tammy Abraham on the score sheet as well. And who knows where he's going to end up in the next few weeks. And Granit Xhaka scoring for Arsenal as well. But a couple of names I want to throw out there. We've already talked about Malang Sarr at center back, Baba Rahman at left back. Hold on to that name for just a second. We talked about Drinkwater, Conte, we know very well. Barkley, we talked about. Abraham, we just talked about. Jake Clark-Salter coming on as well. Zappa Costa coming in as well. Another name on right back or right wing back, whichever way you look at it. Batshuayi, another name in the striking position. So hold on to Batshuayi, and then, of course, Dujon Sterling, who's also had a pretty good preseason so far in the way he's performing. But Baba Rahman and Batshuayi and Zappa Costa, those three names, I'm picking on those names, Rahul, because they've been around for 3 or 4 seasons now. They came in either under Jose Mourinho or under Antonio Conte.
Conte,
We've had
yeah.
quite a few changes since then, and they really haven't got a look in. They've been tried by different managers. They've been shipped off on loan. Where do you go from here?
I I mean,
It's a
if
huge squad.
it's a huge squad, it's a lot of players that we've had for the beginning part of preseason, but as the first team players come back, I think some of these opportunities for the likes of a Baba Rahman and Zappacosta may reduce, and they may be like on the list of let's just go find a new club. But Baba Rahman has looked good. Again, he came in and I think he suffered from an ACL injury,
A huge injury. Yeah.
which kept him out and hampered his chances of making it at Chelsea. Zappacosta, I don't think gets ahead of. If you think about it, we've got Reece James, who's the right wing back. We've got Hudson-Odoi, who could play there. We've got Pulisic, who could play there. We've got Azpilicueta, who could play there. So I don't think Zappacosta is going to be here at the end of this month. But again, you never know. And then Batshuayi, I think it's time to. He's been a good player in terms of when we needed the goals off the bench, but it's been now what Antonio Conte didn't really fancy him, Sarri didn't really fancy him, Lampard didn't really fancy him, and I'm thinking Tuchel's not going to fancy him once Lukaku comes in. So it's time to kind of get them off the books and maybe give Armando Borja the chance to be in that first team squad again. I think he's going out on loan, but it's just a lot of players. I'm kind of out of breath just talking about them.
Yeah, and Rahul, for their careers, I'm looking up. Michy Batshuayi is turning 27 or is 27 years old now. He'll be turning 28 in October. Zappacosta is 29. He will be turning 30 next year. And we've also got Baba Rahman, who, when he came to us, was a young prodigy.
He was, yeah.
And he's turned 27 this year, 28 next year. At this point, if they're really not going to make it at Chelsea, it's time for them to do something for themselves and their careers. Right. And almost move at a time when they can play some of their peak football and show what they have to do. It's tough to see because they are human beings. They are players that had potential and could have done a lot for us. But at the same time, Chelsea need to kind of let them move on. And if you get some money off of them, as sad as it sounds, you can make that return. But they get an opportunity to continue their career and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only last point on this game was in the second half, Tuchel tried the two strikers, Tammy and Batshuayi, and it kind of worked pretty well.
It did.
So it may be, an option that he's trying against teams that we struggled with, just have two strikers, and that may open them up. But it's good to see he's getting the opportunity, like we've been talking about in preseason, to try different things. Maybe not with the players he wants to be trying those with, but again, it gives him an idea of what works with mainly the squad that he wants to play with. And I'm excited because he is a master tactician, and he's getting to kind of, experiment a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. But always exciting to beat Arsenal 2-1, even though it's just preseason. Good start there, but then we move on to the next game. But before we talk about the next game, some fun event occurred right before the game, and I want you to take us through what happened there.
It did. So we've been talking about this UCL trophy parade because we didn't get to, have an official parade like you traditionally do after winning a big trophy. So the Azpilicueta walked out with the trophy as the club captain, and chants of champions of Europe, we know what we are, came out, and basically all the players and the whole squad's around Azpilicueta, and Azpilicueta comes in the middle of the pitch right behind you and puts the trophy there. And it just brought me back to May 29th when we were watching that game, and we've seen the videos of us crying and excited, and it just kind of, for a second, I'd almost forgotten that it had happened, even though I hadn't. And then I see the trophy at Stamford Bridge, and I'm like, hold on, we're champions of Europe.
It's definitely something that's surreal. I think maybe Azpilicueta was standing right here. Yeah. It's a good thing I put this background on.
With this trophy.
With that trophy in that medal. Worked out nicely today. No, look, it's exciting because I think one thing they really missed over the last year was their fans. Yeah. And they've all come out and said they've missed their fans. It's something where they needed fans. It almost like those games that you touched on, Rahul, where we couldn't score a goal or we struggled. It's almost like the fans sometimes become the 12th man,
Yeah.
that extra cheer or that boo against the team that's taking too much of the ball, or rallying us up when we're in a corner or throw in, is things that we really have missed. And so it's a yes, we had fans in the final, and yes, they were there cheering us on, but it's different at home when your people are there week in, week out, telling you how they feel. And so it was a good feeling for them to give back and let's say, here's what we have. And on top of all this, we need to rub it in because we did it while Tottenham was coming over to play with us. So it's one of those things where I think it just rubs salt in the wound and says, look, London is blue, and it's blue again, and it'll continue to stay blue. So definitely amazing to see.
Definitely is. And rubbing salt in their wounds, there was another chant that broke out asking where Harry Kane was during the game. So Chelsea fans doing what they do best, bantering Tottenham, and Tottenham keep getting bantered.
And that's what they'll continue to be for the next season, we hope, at least.
We
Why don't you
hope.
take us through the game, Rahul?
Yeah, so starting lineup in this game, Mendy again in goal. He had a good break because he didn't have, the Euros or the Copa America. So I think he's going to be ready for the new season. Zuma, Chalobah again, Rudiger in defense, Hudson-Odoi, wing back again, Kovacic, Conte in midfield, Alonso, left wing back, Ziyech again starting, Havertz and Werner again getting a start. So kind of a consistent lineup, at least up front.
Yep, definitely so. And I think it's time for him to start picking those players that he wants to start going with. There's a few to come back like Jorginho and all, but good to see that he's giving the players that he wants to play.
Right.
You're almost seeing the team being formed again, which it begs to talk about what we said earlier, that some of these players may need to move on, but good to see all those players. And it started well for a certain wizard that did really well for us in this game, didn't he?
He did, and actually we restarted this game very well, kind of all over Tottenham, and get the goal from Lucas Moura deciding to take on the one player you do not take on in a one-on-one battle is N'Golo Kante, and Kante just kind of slides in, knocks the ball to Ziyech, and at that point it's a counter attack. And Ziyech, to his credit, didn't try to play Timo Werner in. He knew from the moment he picked that ball up, kind of right behind you again, where Azpilicueta put the trophy, that he was going to drive in and rip it into the net, which is what he did.
And he has a good finish. He has a long, hard drive that he kind of knows where the ball's going to end up. And he I think he did it against Manchester City or somebody in an FA Cup or something like that.
Yeah.
And the finish is very similar where he drives into that corner. And it's a really good finish. So I'm impressed with him. I think he's another one that struggled. We didn't talk too much about him. We talked about the Germans. We talked about Mount Pulisic, but he's one that didn't get too much game time under Tuchel. He was in and out. So it's another good season for him to really prove himself and see what he can do as we go forward with 6 competitions, like you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the second half, we started off pretty well, and there was a couple of changes at halftime. But as you went on further into the game, we did get that second goal again from Ziyech.
Yep.
But then the changes started coming in. Bakayoko was already on. Malang Sarr comes on. Zappacosta comes on. Miazga comes on. That's one player we haven't even touched on. Pulisic also came on at halftime. So there was just changes all around, and that kind of affected the chemistry and the way things worked out. And Tottenham worked their way back in from 2-0 down, which is a little bit disappointing. But you've got to remember the point of these games is to build fitness, to get minutes under your belt, in your legs. And so, yes, we should have won the game, but again, the players that eventually ended the game, I mean, were not the players that are most likely going to be playing the next few games when the season starts.
Yeah, and other than minutes, Rahul, I think what we've talked about quite a bit is seeing if we already have players in-house that can do a job for Tuchel.
Right.
Does he need to go buy another right wing back? No, because he's experimenting with Hudson-Odoi. He's experimenting with Zappacosta, seeing if they fit in there. Those are things that will be invaluable, especially if Chelsea are going to go drop 150, 160 million on Lukaku, and then they're potentially going to drop on another center back. You may not have enough funds to play for other positions. So he's going to need to evaluate what he has in-house and see what he can do from there. Now, we may sell a few, we may raise funds, we may get a surprise transfer, but until then, we've got to see what we have in-house. So it's good. I don't think I would look too much into the fact that we've conceded 2 goals. Some of the players that came on really have been in and out of teams for the last year. It's just a chance for them to also prove that they can play football, and hopefully another team is looking at them where they can get picked up on either a loan or a full transfer from there.
Yeah, I agree. And on the point of you saying we've been selling players, we actually have raised about 50 million just from player sales, which is pretty much half of what we need to pay for Lukaku. So
Right.
on paper, it sounds like a lot, but Chelsea have kind of supplemented that with player sales, and we still can sell a lot of players, like you were saying. So it's smart business from Chelsea, and um, you know, compared to the likes of City, we're not just throwing money at a problem. We're trying to get players in because we have the money. We're trying to do it generated by our own, incomings and outgoings. So that's good from the club, and that kind of wraps up the preseason in terms of the friendly games. The real competition starts from next week with the Super Cup and then the Premier League, which we will be doing an episode later this week previewing the Super Cup and then giving our Premier League predictions. And Alex should be back too, so looking forward to that.
Yep. Before we part ways, just one more thing I want to throw out is if you have not seen Reece James's new tattoo, that is an incredible tattoo, especially for him to demo while we're walking around the Tottenham Stadium. He's got the Champions League trophy with the date on his calf there. So if you want to go look at that, go check that out. That's a very, very impressive and definitely a memory forever for him. Young man's going to enjoy that one.
Definitely, and he has the other calf open for the Premier League. That's
there you
go. So
exactly,
definitely a good a good moment for him at his young career, and
right.
He's only going to get better. So we look forward to that.
Yep.
So now we got to move into an interview with Gary Chazardi. He's come in on our podcast before. We did a preview with him for the Real Madrid game, but he joins us now for it's just a quick segment on what he's been doing with Project Goal. We're supporters of Project Goal, a nonprofit that helps middle school kids with school as well as with soccer. And so he's coming in to kind of share more about some of the activities with Project Goal, as well as something that he's doing this Friday with high school kids that are going to college. So we'll now welcome Darius and Jackie. I think you'll be stepping out.
I will indeed. Enjoy the interview and let him know about that Real Madrid game.
I will. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks.
And for our YouTube viewers, the next segment with Darius will be exclusively just on the podcast. So please do tune into that on Apple, Spotify, or Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you very much for joining us on YouTube. But that wraps it up. Please continue to subscribe, like, and follow us. It's at the Premier Chels. Like I said, Apple, Spotify, Google, Instagram, and on Twitter, it's at Premier Chels. And as always, send us your feedback, and we will be back later this week to do a Super Cup preview and a Premier League predictions preview. A big episode coming up later this week. But until then, stay safe and up the Chels.